Throughout history, torture wasn't always about killing. Sometimes, it was about breaking the soul from the inside out. And perhaps no device did that more cruelly than the one quietly known as the Pear of Anguish. Shaped like a delicate flower bud, the pear looked almost ceremonial. But what it did inside the human body was anything but elegant. This was not a weapon of war. It was a tool of shame. It wasn't meant to leave gaping wounds or pools of blood, but to tear a person open from the inside slowly, silently. Its use spread through parts of medieval France, Italy, and Germany in the 16th and 17th centuries. But unlike the rack or the Iron Maiden, the pear was often used in secrecy, behind dungeon doors, where no crowd could witness the cruelty firsthand. Made of metal and engraved in some cases with floral or religious designs, the pear was inserted into an orifice, mouth, rectum, or vaginally, depending on the nature of the accusation. Once inside, a screw mechanism would be slowly turned, causing the four metal petals to open outward and force the body to yield from within. There are chilling reports of its use on priests accused of heresy, people charged with witchcraft, and those labeled moral threats to society. It wasn't always used to kill. Sometimes it was just meant to cause irreversible injury, infection, or silence. Some historians believe the pear was symbolic. In a world where sin was judged by the church, punishment needed to fit the perceived crime. Blasphemers were silenced by damaging the mouth. Those accused of sexual transgressions faced inner destruction, and the sinners had their most private selves violated, not with brute force, but with controlled devastation. Yet evidence of the device's widespread use is scarce. That is part of what makes it so horrifying, not because of how much it was used, but because of how quietly it might have been used. In torture museums across Europe today, replicas of the Pear of Anguish sit under glass. Tour guides explain their function with clinical detachment, but few can hide the discomfort on visitors' faces. The device is small enough to be held in one hand, yet its implications are massive. And here is the most haunting part. The Pear of Anguish left little to no marks on the outside. That was intentional. In medieval law, a clean body meant that the church could justify a person's execution as spiritually sanctioned. No outward signs of barbarism, no rebellion from public opinion, only internal agony. Some variations of the pear included spikes. Others were heated before insertion, making the agony exponentially worse. Once used, the victims were often beyond help, even if they survived. The internal injuries were catastrophic. It's debated whether the pear was ever officially sanctioned by royal courts, or whether it was a device used more by rogue inquisitors, dungeon keepers, or torturers for hire. But there's no question it existed. Multiple versions have been found, and detailed accounts were recorded in both inquisitorial manuals and outlaw confessions. In modern terms, it's hard to imagine a more intimate form of cruelty. The pear wasn't a tool of mass execution. It was one of personalized suffering, and that is perhaps why it has stuck in the dark corner of historical memory. A reminder that some punishments were never about justice. They were about humiliation, degradation, and control. The Pear of Anguish was never built for spectacle. While other methods of torture like hanging, flaying, or burning were often performed in public squares for dramatic effect, this device thrived in the dark. There was no audience, no crowd to witness the slow unfolding of metal inside flesh. Only the sound of gears turning, the tightening of the screw, and the breathless cries of those trying to stay conscious. And in that darkness, it gained a reputation more chilling than any gallows. Some accounts place its use in France's chambre ardente, the secret court used to prosecute poisoners and moral deviants. In those silent chambers, trials were swift and punishments even swifter. The pear was favored because it made no mess. There were no screams that echoed down city alleys. Just quiet agony and silence was what these courts prized most. But it wasn't limited to France. In parts of Italy, particularly during the height of the Roman Inquisition, the pear became associated with moral purification. Women accused of fornication or adultery were its most common victims. They were told the device would heal them spiritual cleansing through internal pain. In truth, it was destruction disguised as discipline. It's even believed that some physicians, working under church authority, assisted in using the device under the pretense of corrective medicine. The lines between healing and punishment blurred during this era. If the body was thought to be corrupted by sin, then the pain was seen as penance and there was no such thing as too much of it. But the pair wasn't limited to women. Men accused of homosexuality were often punished through rectal insertion, in some cases. According to obscure European legal manuscripts, these executions were conducted under candlelight. In basement cells below monasteries and courtrooms, the accused were usually chained to low platforms, gagged to prevent them from biting through their tongues, and left writhing as the device slowly opened inside them. Survivors were rare, but those who lived often suffered permanent internal damage, torn tissue, infections, and loss of bodily function. And while the body could sometimes be patched back together, the spirit rarely recovered. That was the point. Historians still debate the frequency of its use. Some argue it was more symbolic than practical, a torture device to frighten, not necessarily to be used. But there are multiple examples of real metal pairs discovered in European torture chambers, including one unearthed near Nuremberg in the late 1800s, engraved with holy symbols and fitted with locking teeth. These weren't ceremonial. They were built to operate. They were built to open. The pain caused by the pair wasn't explosive, it was slow, creeping, and all-consuming. The body doesn't react well to being split from within. Victims would often faint, regain consciousness, vomit, and lose control of their bladder or bowels. Some accounts even claim that victims were made to watch the screw turn as it worked its way deeper and wider inside them. What's even more chilling is that the pair was sometimes heated, not to the point of melting, but just enough to scald tissue upon contact. In those cases, the device worked doubly as a tearer and a burner. Flames from iron braziers were often used to prepare it, and once the metal was glowing, it was inserted while the victim was held down by multiple executioners. This blend of mechanical and psychological torture was intentional. The idea wasn't just to cause suffering, it was to do so in a way that no one else would ever see, making the pain feel even more isolating. And it wasn't just about punishment. The pair was a message, a threat whispered across towns and through corridors of power. Speak against the church. Step outside the law. Defy the natural order and your body will speak the language of pain from within. Perhaps the most horrifying part of the pair's legacy is how quiet it remained through history. While the Iron Maiden was turned into legend and the rack featured in literature, the pair hid in shadows, passed between inquisitors, and used only when silence was required. And because it rarely killed instantly, it left its victims either broken or permanently maimed. The punishment could stretch over hours or even days. One surviving manuscript from the Augsburg witch trials mentions a woman named Margareta who, after being accused of communing with spirits, was taken underground for internal examination. The document never says the word pair, but the description matches it perfectly. She was damaged inside, rendered unable to stand or walk afterward, and died several days later of what the scribe called bleeding sickness of the womb. It's stories like Margarita's that remind us of what history often tries to forget. As Europe entered the Renaissance, some forms of torture faded with time, but the Pear of Anguish lingered in legal shadows longer than many think. Even into the 17th century, traveling executioners and local magistrates in parts of the Holy Roman Empire and Low Countries allegedly kept variations of the pair in their private torture arsenals. Some were modified with barbs, others were cast in iron and silver, not for display, but for ritual punishment among the aristocracy and religious sects. And in the age of witch hunts, the pair became a tool of misogyny cloaked in divine purpose. Women accused of sorcery were frequently subjected to internal torture as proof of demonic pacts. The twisted logic claimed that tearing the body might release the evil within. Victims were chained in crypts or cold basements and subjected to this cruel ordeal, with no witnesses, because even the courts hesitated to document what was done. In one infamous German case from 1623, a woman named Elisabeth Meyer was condemned for consorting with forest spirits. But even as torture devices fell out of official use, the Pear of Anguish left an invisible scar across European collective memory. It became a symbol whispered about in cloisters, referenced in occult texts, and sometimes misused in romanticized fiction as a metaphor. But the truth was always darker than fiction.